So the Tuesday talk that was live did not post, and I cannot find it. Thank you, technology. So I'm quickly going to re-record the Tuesday talk. Hopefully I will cover everything that I did the first round. So let me start like I always do. Welcome to Tuesday Talk with Bim Group. My name is Deanna Sizemore. I'm Director of Compliance for Bim Group, and I'm here with you every other Tuesday for Tuesday Talk with Bim. Today we're going to talk about employer mandated vaccines. Can you mandate them, or should they be voluntary? So let me also start by saying that Bim Group is here to advise and educate. We are not a proponent of either direction, whether mandatory or voluntary. However, we will be more than happy to discuss the pros and cons with you, and if necessary, get you in touch with legal counsel to help you make that determination. And if you just do decide to have a mandatory vaccine, that it is implemented correctly and follows the guidelines that are set out for that vaccine. So, as we all may know, we've got 3 pharmaceutical companies that are on the verge of releasing a COVID vaccine. It's AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Pfizer. 2 of the 3 have said that their vaccine is ready for release, hopefully within the next week or so. It'll be made available first to those who are high risk, elderly, those in the nursing homes. And then I think the second wave is healthcare providers, frontline emergency workers, and that sort of thing. So the question for, our clients and for you is, can I make it mandatory, or does it have to be voluntary? The answer is yes, you can make it mandatory. However, you have to allow for certain exemptions. As with anything in HR, it's not just one law that regulates something, it's several laws that fall under it. So with a mandatory vaccine, under the EEOC, if an employee says, this is against, I don't want to do this because I have a medical condition that is going to react to something in the vaccine. Under the EEOC ADA accommodation, you have to make that accommodation for that employee. So you have to be able to say, we can't require you to take the vaccine, but you're still, maybe employment was contingent upon it or something to that effect. So you can still have access to employment. You can still do this, you can still do that, but we can't force you to take the vaccine. Another exemption is a religious accommodation. That a religious accommodation is under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So if someone says it is against their inherent religious belief system, you cannot force them to take it. And if anything, an employer who provides that reasonable accommodation, you do so in the event that it's not an undue hardship. If it's a hardship, then there are some things we need to consider. Probably need to get an attorney on the phone, see what our options are. And then with anything that's mandatory like that, if you are going to mandate something, it's always best to have a policy behind it. So with anything, you want that policy, you want that well written. You want to include maybe all vaccines. What the EEOC is recommending right now is that the COVID vaccine be prefaced with a vaccine policy, and that it be made voluntary and encourage people to take it versus mandatory. I think a lot of that is employee pushback for something that's mandatory versus something you're strongly encouraging. Now, if you're in a nursing home situation, a hospital situation, clinic situation, that's very different than someone who maybe is running a manufacturing plant or a retail store or a restaurant, for example. So again, just some things to consider. The one thing we do know is the EEOC came out back in the beginning and said that COVID-19 was a direct threat standard, I think is the words they use. So that allows employers to do more extensive medical inquiries and controls than normal. That's why we can tell people if they've been exposed to COVID, who that direct exposure was. You can tell the health department who was exposed at your employment. What we don't have is information from the EEOC on how and if the vaccine can be mandated and what the requirements are around that. We do have that COVID testing can be made mandatory. We have that COVID testing is covered at 100%. We have that COVID vaccine should also be covered at 100%, but we don't have can it be mandatory and how is it mandatory and what regs do we have to follow or not follow for it to be mandatory. So some things to keep in mind as you go through that. The other piece that I talked about was having that flu vaccination policy or vaccination policy for all vaccines, including the flu or whatever that may be. It's always better to have that policy before something happens than after something happens and you have to scramble and put it together. So think through that, be thinking through that now, trying to determine if you have a policy and what that policy is it voluntary, is it mandatory? You know, you have to think about objections to mandatory vaccines and what that would look like and how your response would be and what the accommodations may be. You know, and by encouraging vaccinations, you can go as far as to have a vaccination drive on the premises, offer free vaccines to staff and their dependents, allow for paid time off to go get the vaccine. So there's going to be a lot of things to take into consideration when developing that policy. You know, you also want to take into account local and state laws as well as CDC and EEOC recommendations. Another thing you may want to think about is if you work with union employees, you know, you've got to be able to address that from the union's perspective. There was a blog post recently from E is for ERISA that I follow that was about 7 or 8 really great questions on COVID vaccinations and mandatory and incentives and all that. So we're gonna post that on the Tuesday Talk site. Actually, we'll link it here momentarily on the Facebook under this post. But I want to run through those real quick. And before I do that, though, let me say that we didn't have any questions on the live, so we didn't miss anything there. But I think these are really great questions to get the conversations going. And as always, if you've got questions or comments after the fact, please feel free to email or call me. I will also put my email and phone number in the comments of this video. So the first question is, now that the COVID vaccine is available, or soon to be available, can I require employees to be vaccinated as a condition of employment? The law does not specifically say yes, and it doesn't say no. So the advice is to be cautious. Consider that ADA violation or a potential violation because it is a medical exam. The EEOC previously said that COVID testing was permitted under the ADA because it falls under a permitted category, but we don't know what the COVID vaccine is going to fall under yet. So hopefully we'll get that from the EEOC sooner than later. Do you have to treat all employees' objections to the vaccine equally, or do some objections trigger legal duties of combination? And we briefly talked about this. You know, the law requires you to provide a reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities that may be impacted by the vaccine. There's also an accommodation for those with the religious exemption under Title VII that we talked about. Question number 3 is, will I get in trouble if I only require some employees, such as customer-facing employees or workers, get vaccinated, but others not? Not necessarily. You can make distinctions between job classes or job duties. Again, I would say proceed with caution, get legal advice. The situation I think of is maybe a front office where you've got workers in contact with the public all day versus a back office where there's 4 or 5 people in their own office and they're not interfacing with the public. You might want those front office workers to be vaccinated, but make it optional for those that are not in the front office. Question number 4 is, will my company face a penalty, a potential liability, a potential liability if an employee has a bad reaction to the vaccine, and doesn't matter that the formal FDA is still pending. Formal FDA approval is still pending. So the law doesn't really answer that. We don't know. However, any type of employer liability for work-related injuries falls under workers' comp. It might be covered by workers' comp. Again, we don't know. This is all new information that we're trying to determine how's it going to go when it does happen. Again, trying to think about things before they happen and have a idea of what our play is going to be. That's a great reason to have a vaccination policy. You can have in there that you have accommodations, that it is encouraged, not required, or, maybe it is required, and then maybe you have a statement that says you're not held liable. Again, these are things that if you get to that point, we want you to engage with legal counsel so that you're protected. Question number 5 says, can you offer a wellness program incentive to encourage employees to get the COVID-19 vaccine? You absolutely can. I'm starting to think that the technology world is after me today. In the middle of me answering question number 5, I got a phone call and the video stopped. So let's try this again. Question number 5, can I offer a wellness incentive to encourage employees to get the COVID-19 vaccine? You absolutely can. It can be in the form of, maybe it's a gift card or cash reward, but just remember that that is considered compensation and it is taxable. It's also generally considered compensation and counted under 401k and other retirement plans. The next question talks about the dollar limit on that incentive. So yes, you can offer an incentive, but it's going to fall under the wellness guidelines incentives. So that's something you want to take into consideration. Whether it's the ADA incentive limit, which has actually been vacated and we're waiting for more regs, or the HIPAA incentive limit. Again, things that we need to think about as you're creating a policy or an incentive under a wellness program to encourage individuals or mandate individuals to get the vaccine. Question number 7 is, if an employee has a disability that makes that vaccination inappropriate for them, do we still have to offer it to them in order to earn that incentive? And again, the answer is yes. You're following the wellness regulations, which says if you're offering a medical exam of any kind and there is an incentive, you have to make a reasonable alternative standard or accommodation for other employees to access that same incentive without them having to complete the first piece of it. So if it's a vaccine earns a $50 gift card and someone says they can't take it because maybe they're allergic to something in the vaccine, or it's a religious exemption, in order to get that incentive, you need to have an accommodation available in order for them to earn that $50, whether that's moving their desk, giving them additional PPE, personal protective equipment, whatever that may be. And then the last question is, do you need to notify employees about the incentive? Again, yes, kind of going back to those wellness regs. If you offer a medical exam with an incentive tied to it, you have to notify everyone that's it's available. And it has to be offered to all similarly situated employees. So I'm going to make sure to post these questions on our Tuesday Talk page, as well as the Bim Group website, along with the recording of today's message. And I'll include my contact information. So if you've got questions or concerns and you want to explore it a little bit further, don't hesitate to give me a call. Do know that if you decide you want to go down the path of mandatory vaccines, we're probably going to refer you to your legal counsel or connect you with our legal counsel so that you can get the appropriate documentation that you need in order to do that. If you want to just encourage employees to take it, we can absolutely help with communications. I think we have a sample vaccine policy that I can share as well, but we'll be happy to have those conversations with you. So feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions. Also, before I go, we will not have a Tuesday Talk in 2 weeks. That is the week of Christmas, I believe, if I'm looking at my calendar correctly. So I will be back the second week in January for our Tuesday Talk. And I hope everyone has a great holiday, a great new year. And here's to 2021 being better than 2020. So thank you all so much and have a wonderful afternoon.